Based on my search, I see there was an outline for a story about someone winning the lottery and testing their family. I'll create the complete 10,000-word story as requested following the same structure, but with original content. I'm Ava, 32, from Portland. I won a $16 million lottery jackpot but told absolutely no one. After losing my marketing job, I was struggling financially. My family and I have had a complicated relationship since my parents' divorce, so I decided to test them by asking for help during my financial crisis. Their reactions, let's just say they changed everything. If you're watching this, let me know where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about family loyalty and unexpected twists of fate. Growing up in Portland, my childhood was pretty typical of a middle-class family in the Pacific Northwest. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house with a small backyard where my dad Graham would grill every Sunday, rain or shine. Mum Diane worked part-time as a nurse, and Dad was an accountant. My brother Kyle was 3 years older than me, and we got along well enough, sharing a love for board games and hiking in the nearby mountains. Everything changed when I was 15. The fighting had been going on for months, but I still wasn't prepared when my parents called Kyle and me into the living room one evening to announce they were getting divorced. It wasn't just the separation that hurt. It was how bitter and ugly things became. They fought over everything: the house, the car, even the family dog. What hurt most was how quickly they seemed to forget about Kyle and me in their rush to hurt each other. Kyle, then 18, sided firmly with Dad. "Mom's been cheating," he whispered to me one night, though I never saw any evidence of this. "Dad deserves better." Within months of the divorce, my father met Patty, a real estate agent with 2 teenagers of her own, Jason and Tiffany. They married quickly, creating this new instant family that never quite felt like mine. Meanwhile, Mum sank into a depression that seemed bottomless. She moved into a small apartment across town and began depending on me emotionally in ways that felt overwhelming for a teenager. "You're the only one who understands me, Ava," she would say, sobbing on my shoulder. "Your father destroyed our family, and now you're all I have." By 16, I was essentially raising myself. Kyle went off to college on a partial scholarship with Dad and Patty covering the rest. I stayed with Mom during the week and occasionally visited Dad's new house on weekends, where I always felt like an unwelcome guest. Patty would make comments about how much I looked like my mother, never a compliment in her book. Her kids, Jason and Tiffany, tolerated me at best. After high school, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through community college. Mum would call in the middle of my shifts, crying about bills or loneliness. Dad and Patty bought Kyle a car when he graduated, but when I finished my associate degree, Dad just said, "Good job, kiddo," and Patty gave me a $50 gift card to Target. I eventually transferred to Portland State, still working nights and weekends while carrying a full course load. Kyle had landed a job at a prestigious real estate firm, through Patty's connections, of course, and rarely called anymore. When he did, he'd talk about his new car, his fancy apartment, the women he was dating. "You should think about real estate," he'd say, "though you need to invest in a better wardrobe first. Appearance matters in this business." After graduation, I was lucky to land a job as a junior marketing associate at a tech startup. For 6 years, I worked my way up to marketing manager. I wasn't wealthy, but for the first time, I felt financially stable. I could afford a small 1-bedroom apartment, occasionally eat at restaurants, and even started a modest savings account. Mum still called regularly for emotional and sometimes financial support, but I was finally building something for myself. Then came the layoffs. Our company was acquired by a larger corporation, and my entire department was deemed redundant. Despite my years of service and consistently positive reviews, I found myself clearing out my desk with 2 weeks severance pay and a generic reference letter. The job market was brutal. I sent out hundreds of applications, went on dozens of interviews, but kept hearing the same thing: "We're looking for someone with a different skill set," or "We've decided to go with another candidate." My savings dwindled rapidly. Rent in Portland had skyrocketed, and soon I was facing the very real possibility of not making next month's payment. My apartment was nothing special, a small 1-bedroom with thin walls and temperamental plumbing. But it was mine. I'd painted the walls, hung artwork I loved, created a home for myself. The thought of losing it kept me up at night, stomach churning with anxiety. My friend circle had shrunk over the years as I focused on work and managing my mother's emotional needs. But I still had Maggie, my best friend since college. She was the only person who truly understood my family dynamics because she'd witnessed them firsthand. "Your parents really did a number on you," she'd say, not unkindly. You know it's not normal to feel responsible for your mother's happiness, right? Maggie was doing well as a graphic designer, but she was saving for her wedding and paying off student loans. I couldn't bring myself to ask her for financial help, though I knew she would offer if I explained my situation. There was my pride too. I'd been self-sufficient for so long. The thought of admitting defeat was almost as painful as the financial strain itself. As my bank account approached zero, I started considering my options. I could ask family for help, but the thought made my stomach twist into knots. Dad and Patty lived in a 4-bedroom house with a pool now. Kyle drove a Tesla and posted pictures from exotic vacations on social media. Even Mum had remarried a few years back to Walter, a retired engineer with a decent pension. Everyone seemed financially secure except me. And that's where my story was when everything changed. Broke scared and wondering if the family that had always kept me at arm's length would step up when I truly needed them. It was a Friday evening in September when my life changed forever. I was walking home from yet another disappointing job interview. This one for a position I was vastly overqualified for, yet still unlikely to get. I stopped at Marty's corner store, the little market near my apartment, where I'd been buying a single lottery ticket every Friday for the past 5 years. "The usual?" Marty asked as I approached the counter. He was in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "You know it," I replied, handing over my last $5 bill. "One Mega Millions ticket quick pick." "Feeling lucky today?" he asked, printing out my ticket. I laughed humorlessly. Marty, at this point, luck is about all I have left. He slid the ticket across the counter. "Well, they say luck comes when you've hit rock bottom. Maybe today's your day." I tucked the ticket into my wallet without much thought. This was just a ritual, a tiny splurge, that gave me a moment's daydream about a better life. I never actually expected to win. That night, I heated up my last package of ramen noodles and sat on my second-hand couch, absently scrolling through job listings on my laptop. The lottery drawing was happening live, but I barely paid attention until something made me look up at the television screen. The announcer was reading off numbers, and something felt oddly familiar. I pulled out my ticket and stared at it, then back at the screen, then at my ticket again. My hands began to shake. 4, 16, 23, 37, 52, and Mega Ball 18. I checked again, and again, and again. My ticket matched every single number. "No way," I whispered to the empty apartment. "No way in hell." I grabbed my laptop and searched for the lottery website, needing to verify the numbers. There they were, the same sequence on my ticket. I checked the jackpot amount and nearly choked. $16 million. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. When I returned to the couch, I was shaking uncontrollably. I tried calling Maggie, but my fingers were trembling so badly I couldn't hit the right buttons. I paced my small apartment until dawn, alternating between hysterical laughter and tears, convinced I must have made a mistake. When morning finally came, I called in sick to a temp job I'd picked up filing paperwork at a dental office, then researched what to do next. I learned that I needed to sign the back of the ticket immediately and keep it somewhere secure. I signed it with shaking hands, took photos of both sides, then placed it in a Ziploc bag inside a book that I put under my mattress. The lottery office opened at 9 a.m. and I was there at 8:30, pacing outside the building. When they finally let me in, I approached the counter and whispered, "I think I won the jackpot." The woman behind the desk gave me a kind but skeptical smile. She'd probably heard this many times before. But when she checked my ticket, her eyes widened. "Oh my goodness, please come with me." What followed was a blur of verification procedures, paperwork, and conversations with lottery officials. They explained my options. Take the full amount spread over 30 annual payments or a lump sum of about 60% of the total. They also warned me about the publicity that typically comes with major lottery wins. "In this state, we're required to release your name as the winner," a lottery official explained, "but we can help minimize exposure if you prefer." I nodded numbly, still processing. "I need to think about all this. Can I consult with someone first?" They gave me the contact information for several financial advisors who specialized in sudden wealth and assured me my ticket was secure with them until I made my decision. I left in a daze and immediately called the most affordable advisor on their list. The next day, I sat in his office as he explained my options. "The lump sum will give you about $9.6 million before taxes," he said. "After federal and state taxes, you're looking at approximately $6 million. $6 million? I repeated the words, not feeling real. "I recommend setting up a trust and a new bank account at a different institution from where you currently bank, he continued. And Ms. Walker, I strongly suggest you keep this information private as long as possible. Lottery winners often find themselves surrounded by people looking for handouts. That advice triggered something in me. I remembered reading stories about lottery winners whose lives fell apart after their win. Family conflicts, friendships destroyed, even bankruptcies and suicides. The common denominator seemed to be how quickly people came out of the woodwork asking for money. As I left his office, I made a decision I wouldn't tell anyone about my winnings. Not yet. First, I would set up the proper financial structures as the advisor suggested. Then I would see who in my life truly cared about me, separate from my newfound wealth. I thought about how money had always been a source of tension in my family. Dad using it to show his success and superiority. Mum guilt-tripping me about her financial struggles. Kyle flaunting his lifestyle that had been handed to him through connections I never had. I remembered birthdays where Dad and Patty gave Kyle expensive gifts while I received token presents. I recalled asking for help with college tuition and being told to build character by working my way through school. I thought about the times I'd help Mum pay her bills, while she complained about my stinginess if I couldn't cover everything. What would they do if they knew I had millions? Would they suddenly care more? Would I become their favorite person? The thought made me feel sick. Following my advisor's guidance, I established a trust, opened accounts at a new bank, and arranged for the Lottery Commission to transfer my winnings with as little publicity as possible. There was a small mention in the local newspaper, but with just my last name and first initial. A. Walker wins Mega Millions jackpot, buried on page 6. No one connected it to me. As the money hit my account, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about paying bills or making rent. But instead of elation, I felt a profound curiosity. Now that I didn't need help, would my family offer it anyway? The idea came to me late one night as I stared at my ceiling, thinking about my family. What if I could see how they would react to me needing help? Without the lottery win clouding their judgment, I could create a scenario where I needed financial assistance. Approach each family member individually and see who would step up, not knowing I was actually a millionaire. The more I thought about it, the more compelling the idea became. It wasn't about revenge or tricking them. It was about seeing the truth of our relationships without money influencing their behavior. Once I knew who truly cared, I could make informed decisions about sharing my wealth. I spent days crafting the perfect story. I would tell them I was in danger of losing my apartment due to continued unemployment. I'd say I needed temporary help with rent until I found a new job, about $1,500, which was a reasonable request given their financial situations. It was enough money to matter, but not so much that it would cause genuine hardship for any of them. I planned how to approach each person. Mum and her husband Walter lived about 20 minutes away, so I'd visit them at home. Dad and Patty lived in the suburbs. I'd suggest a dinner at their house. Kyle was always busy, so I'd offer to meet him at a restaurant of his choosing. I even planned to reach out to my step-siblings Jason and Tiffany, though we rarely spoke. As I refined my plan, doubts crept in. Was this deceptive, manipulative? I wasn't asking for money I actually needed, and I was deliberately creating a false scenario. But then again, I wasn't planning to keep any money they might offer. In fact, I intended to give each of them a gift, regardless of their response to my request. I called Maggie to talk through my moral dilemma. She was the only person I was tempted to tell about my win, but I held back, wanting a completely unbiased opinion. "Let me get this straight, Issei," she said after I explained my plan. "You want to pretend you're broke to see if your family will help you." "Basically, yes," I admitted. "I just want to know who I can count on when things get tough." Maggie sighed. "Ava, I get where you're coming from, but this feels like a trap. People don't like being tested. What if they find out?" "How would they find out?" I countered. "I am unemployed. My savings are running low. Or they would be if not for the lottery win. It's not completely dishonest." "But it's not completely honest either," Maggie said gently. "What are you hoping to gain from this?" I thought about it. "Clarity. I want to know who deserves to be in my life going forward." "Assistant." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "I think you already know the answer to that. You've been taking care of yourself for years without much help from them. Do you really need to set up this test to confirm what you already suspect?" Her words stung because they held truth. Part of me already knew what would happen, but another part desperately hoped to be wrong. "I need to be sure," I said finally. "I need to see it for myself." "Then be careful," she warned. This could backfire in ways you haven't anticipated. After our call, I practiced my story until it felt believable. I rehearsed looking worried, but not desperate, concerned, but not pathetic. I needed to strike the perfect balance, a person in genuine need but still maintaining dignity. I also set aside $10,000 for each family member, regardless of how they responded to my request. If they helped me, I would return their money along with this gift. If they refused, they would still receive the gift eventually. This wasn't about punishment, it was about understanding the true nature of our relationships. As I prepared to conduct my test, I established clear criteria for what would constitute passing. I wasn't expecting anyone to immediately write me a check for the full amount. Help could come in many forms, offering a place to stay, connecting me with job opportunities, providing a partial loan, or even just showing genuine concern and brainstorming solutions with me. What mattered was the spirit behind their response. Were they truly concerned about my well-being? Did they prioritize my needs or their own convenience? Did they make me feel valued and supported, or judged and burdensome with my criteria established and my story prepared? I sent out messages scheduling meetings with my family members. I need to talk to you about something important. I wrote to each of them. It's personal and I could use your advice. The responses came quickly, each one setting the stage for what was to come. My mother immediately called, sounding worried and asking if I was sick. My father sent a brief text. Dinner at our place Thursday. Patty's making lasagna. Carl suggested meeting at an upscale restaurant downtown. Jason didn't respond at all, and Tiffany sent a message saying she was super busy but could do a quick phone call. As the meetings approached, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I was about to get answers to questions I'd carried my whole adult life. I just wasn't sure I was ready for them. I decided to start with my mother. Though our relationship had been complicated by her emotional dependence on me, I held out hope that maternal instinct would overcome her self-absorption when faced with her daughter in crisis. Mum and Walter lived in a tidy ranch-style house they'd purchased after their marriage 5 years ago. As I pulled into their driveway, I noticed the garden was blooming with fall chrysanthemums. My mother's proud hobby now that she had free time as a retired nurse. She greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted a beat too long. Ava, I was so worried when you called. You never ask for advice. We sat in her sunny kitchen while Walter putted in the garage, giving us privacy. Mum poured coffee and placed a store-bought coffee cake between us, cutting a large slice for herself. So what's this important thing you wanted to discuss? She asked, fork poised. I took a deep breath and launched into my prepared story. I've been struggling since losing my job. The severance is gone and I've only found occasional temp work. I've applied everywhere, but nothing's coming through. I paused, looking down at my hands. Mum, I might lose my apartment next month. I'm short on rent and my landlord isn't flexible. See, Mum's expression cycled rapidly from concern to alarm to something else. Fear. She set down her fork. Oh, sweetheart. That's terrible. How much are you short? About $1,500, I said. I hate asking, but I don't know where else to turn. Her face fell. 1,500. Oh, Ava. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. Things are tight for us too, you know. Walter's pension only goes so far, and we just had to put a new roof on the house. I nodded, not pushing, just waiting to see where she would take the conversation. Have you asked your father? He and Patty have that big house and all those vacations. Surely they could help. I'm planning to talk to them next, I said. I wanted to come to you first. Something like guilt flashed across her face. That's thoughtful of you, honey. She reached across the table and patted my hand. You know you could always move in with us temporarily. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. This was the kind of offer I'd been looking for. Not ideal, but a genuine attempt to help. Walter's son left some exercise equipment in the spare bedroom, she continued. But we could move that to the garage. You'd have to help with groceries, of course, and utilities would go up with another person showering and such. As she spoke, the flutter of hope died. She wasn't offering sanctuary. She was negotiating a rental agreement. And it would be so nice having you around to help me with the garden and driving me to my appointments. Walter's so busy with his golf games, and my arthritis makes driving difficult some days. By the end of our conversation, it was clear that my mother's offer came with strings attached. I would essentially become her live-in assistant in exchange for a room in her house. When I gently steered the conversation back to a potential loan for my rent, she became flustered. Ava, you know I would if I could, but we're on a fixed income now. It's different when you're retired. You still have time to rebuild your career. When I was your age, I worked 2 nursing shifts back to back sometimes. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with text messages from Mum. Her ideas kept coming. I should apply at the hospital where she used to work. I could sell my furniture to make rent. Perhaps I could find a roommate on Craigslist. None of her suggestions involved her actually helping me beyond offering a room with expectations attached. 2 days later, I met Kyle at Pinnacle, a trendy restaurant downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and white tablecloths. He arrived 15 minutes late, dressed in an expensive suit, fresh from showing a multi-million-dollar listing, as he immediately informed me. "Sorry about the time, sis," he said, not looking particularly sorry. Client meeting ran long, but I closed the deal. He ordered a $90 bottle of wine without consulting me, then looked at me expectantly. "So what's this big important thing you needed to discuss?" I told him the same story I'd told Mum, keeping my tone measured, trying to convey concern without desperation. As I spoke, Kyle sipped his wine and checked his watch twice. When I finished, he set down his glass with a sigh. Ava, this is exactly why I've always told you that you need to think bigger. Marketing is so limiting. You should have gone into real estate years ago when I suggested it." "That's not really helpful right now, Kyle," I said quietly. He shrugged. "Just saying, this wouldn't be happening if you'd made better choices." He signaled the waiter for more wine. "How much do you need?" "About $1,500 for rent while I keep looking for a steady job," I replied. Kyle pulled out his phone and started tapping on it. "I could loan you $500, he said, not looking up. "But I'd need you to sign something. Business is business, even with family. Actually, especially with family." "A loan agreement?" I asked. "Just something basic, term of 6 months, 8% interest." He looked up and must have caught my expression. "That's below market rate, Ava. I'm cutting you a deal here. 8% interest from your own sister who's about to be homeless." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Kyle's face hardened. "This is exactly your problem. You're too emotional about money. It's just business. Smart people make their money work for them." He launched into a lecture about financial responsibility while ordering a $60 steak. I sat quietly letting him talk, noting how not once did he ask if I was okay emotionally or offer any solution that didn't benefit him in some way. As we parted, he handed me his business card. "Think about my offer, 500 6 months, 8%. And seriously consider getting your real estate license. You're not bad with people when you try." In the parking lot, he climbed into his Tesla while I walked to my 9-year-old Honda. He didn't offer me a ride home or even ask if I had money for gas. As I watched his taillights disappear, I felt oddly calm. The test was confirming what I'd suspected but never wanted to admit. My brother saw me as a business opportunity, at best a disappointment at worst, but never as someone worthy of his genuine concern. The dinner at my father and stepmother's suburban home was set for Thursday evening. As I drove through their neighborhood of large houses with manicured lawns, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. The same anxiety I'd experienced every time I visited since they moved here when I was 16. Their house was a sprawling 2-story colonial with white columns and professional landscaping. Patty's luxury SUV and my father's German sedan sat in the circular driveway. I parked my Honda behind them, acutely aware of the contrast. Dad opened the door before I could knock. "There's my girl," he said with a broad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He gave me a quick side hug, careful not to wrinkle his golf shirt. "Come on in. Patty's just finishing up dinner." The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Open concept with high ceilings, granite countertops, and furniture that looked straight out of a design magazine. Family photos lined the hallway, predominantly featuring Kyle Patty's kids and their various achievements. There were only 2 pictures of me, my high school graduation, and a group shot from Dad and Patty's wedding where I stood awkwardly at the edge. Patty emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron over her designer outfit, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite her claims of slaving over dinner. "Ava, so nice to see you," she said, ear-kissing near my cheek. "You look tired. Are you sleeping enough?" "Work has been stressful," I replied, maintaining my cover story. "Well, unemployment will do that to you," Dad chimed in with a chuckle. "Though I suppose you have plenty of time to sleep now, right?" Dinner was served at their formal dining table set with china that had never been used during my childhood. Patty's lasagna was clearly store-bought but plated to look homemade. Her children Jason and Tiffany joined us both looking bored and checking their phones throughout the meal. "So Ava," Dad said after preliminary small talk about his golf game and Patty's charity committee, "you said you wanted to discuss something important. Is this about a job prospect finally? I set down my fork and began my now well-rehearsed story about financial difficulties and the potential loss of my apartment. As I spoke, I watched their reactions carefully. Dad's face grew increasingly disappointed, his mouth turning down at the corners. Paddy maintained a neutral expression that occasionally slipped into something resembling satisfaction. Jason and Tiffany barely looked up from their phones, clearly finding my problems unworthy of their attention. When I finished, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Dad cleared his throat. Well, that's certainly a situation. It's just temporary, I added quickly. I have promising interviews lined up. I just need help making rent this month while I secure something. Dad exchanged a glance with Paddy, some unspoken communication passing between them. How much are we talking about, Isha? He asked. $1,500. I replied the same amount I'd asked of Mom and Kyle. Dad whistled low. That's a lot of money to just hand over Ava. Paddy set down her wine glass with a little too much force. Graham, remember what Dr. Phillips said in that parenting book, sometimes helping isn't really helping. Dr. Phillips, I asked. Our family therapist, Paddy explained with a thin smile. He's been wonderful for helping us understand family dynamics. He says that sometimes, when we rush to solve our adult children's problems, we prevent them from developing resilience. Jason snorted without looking up. She didn't give me that speech when she paid off my credit cards last month. Paddy shot him a warning look before turning back to me. That was different, Jason. You had an unexpected medical expense. His medical expense was laser hair removal, Tiffany muttered, earning her own glare from Paddy. Dad, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, cleared his throat again. Ava, I'm not saying we won't help. I'm just concerned about the pattern here. You're 32 and still living paycheck to paycheck. Kyle was already on his second investment property at your age. Kyle had advantages I didn't, I said quietly. Connections through Paddy. Your help with college so he graduated without debt. The down payment you gave him for his first condo. Dad's face reddened. That's not fair. We helped you too. How? The question came out sharper than I intended. There was... He fumbled, unable to cite a specific example. You never asked for help the way Kyle did. You were always so independent. I'm asking now, I said simply. Dad excused himself to use the bathroom. When he left, Paddy leaned toward me. Ava, you have to understand. Your father and I are planning for retirement. We can't just hand out money every time someone has a crisis. We have 4 children to consider in our estate planning. I blinked at her inclusion of me, in the count, given how rarely I was treated as part of the family. I'm not asking for a place in anyone's will. I just need help making rent, so I don't lose my home. Paddy smiled tightly. Have you considered downsizing? There are perfectly adequate studio apartments that would be more within your means. When Dad returned, his demeanour had changed. He was more businesslike, less flustered. Ava, your stepmother and I have discussed it. We can't give you $1,500. I nodded, having expected this response, but still feeling the sting. But, he continued, I would be willing to co-sign for you if you want to look for a more affordable apartment. There are some nice places in the outer suburbs that would be half what you're paying now. The outer suburbs, I repeated. Dad, that would add hours to my commute when I find work, and co-signing doesn't solve my immediate problem of making rent this month. He shrugged. It's the best we can do right now. As the evening wound down, I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back, I overheard Paddy and my father in the kitchen. You handled that well, Paddy was saying. We can't enable her, Graham. Look how Kyle has flourished with the right kind of support. I know, Dad sighed. I just hate to see her struggling. She needs to learn financial responsibility, Paddy insisted. Your guilt doesn't help her in the long run. I stepped into the kitchen as if I hadn't heard, thanked them for dinner and left shortly after. In my car, I finally allowed the tears to come. Not because they wouldn't give me money, I didn't actually need it, but because of the stark reality their response revealed. My struggles were seen as character flaws rather than circumstances. My father's love was conditional, filtered through Paddy's influence and his own disappointment that I hadn't followed the path he approved of. The drive home was a blur through tears. I pulled over twice when the crying made it hard to see. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt hollowed out but strangely clear-headed. 3 tests, 3 failures. My family had shown me exactly where I stood in their lives. Somewhere below convenience, somewhere after self-interest. The pain was excruciating but also clarifying. Now I knew After the devastating interactions with my family, I felt emotionally drained. I called in sick to my temp job and spent the day in bed replaying the conversations in my mind. By evening, I needed to talk to someone who actually cared, so I called Maggie and asked if she could come over. When she arrived with a bottle of wine and take-out Thai food, I broke down again. Through tears, I told her everything. Not just about my family's reactions to my supposed financial crisis, but also about the lottery win I'd kept secret. Wait, you won what? Maggie's eyes widened to comical proportions. $16 million, and you've been sitting on this information while pretending to be broke. Ava, what the actual hell? I know it sounds crazy, I admitted, wiping my eyes, but I needed to know who would be there for me if money wasn't a factor. Maggie set down her wine glass and gave me a long, measured look. And what did you learn? That blood doesn't mean loyalty? I said softly. My mother offered me a room in exchange for becoming her personal assistant. Kyle offered a loan with interest and a lecture. Dad and Patty offered to co-sign on a cheaper apartment in the middle of nowhere while discussing behind my back how they shouldn't enable me. Maggie reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry they disappointed you, but are you really surprised? I thought about it. No, deep down I'm not surprised, but I guess I needed to see it clearly with no excuses or justifications. I needed to know it wasn't all in my head. So what now? Maggie asked. Are you going to tell them about the money? Eventually, I said. But not yet. I need time to process all this and decide what kind of relationship I want with them moving forward. Maggie nodded. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this with a lot more grace than most people would. The next morning, I woke to a knock on my door. It was Arthur, my elderly neighbour from across the hall. I'd always exchanged pleasantries with him, but never really had a deep conversation. Morning, Ava, he said, looking concerned. I hope you don't mind me checking in. I heard crying through the wall last night and wanted to make sure you're okay. I was mortified that my breakdown had been audible, but touched by his concern. I'm fine, Arthur. Just going through some family stuff. He nodded understandingly. Family can be the source of our greatest joys and deepest wounds. He hesitated, then added, I also couldn't help overhearing your conversation with your mother last week about your apartment situation. Now I was truly embarrassed. The walls in our building were apparently much thinner than I'd realized. I have a spare room, Arthur continued before I could respond. It's small, used to be my home office before I retired, but there's a daybed and a desk. If you need a place while you get back on your feet, you're welcome to it. I'd only ask for a small contribution toward groceries, whatever you can manage. I stood in my doorway stunned. This man who barely knew me was offering more genuine help than my entire family combined. That's incredibly kind of you, Arthur, I managed to say. I don't know what to say. He waved off my thanks. Been there myself once. Lost my job during the recession back in 2009, nearly lost everything. A friend's kindness made all the difference, just paying it forward. After Arthur left, I checked my email and found a message from Rachel, a former co-worker I hadn't spoken to in months. Hey Ava, heard through the grapevine that you're still job hunting. My brother's company is looking for a marketing manager. It's a smaller operation than you're used to, but the team is great. I already mentioned you to him. Let me know if you want me to make a formal introduction. Hang in there. That same afternoon, while grabbing a coffee at the shop near my apartment, the barista, Zoe, according to her name tag, slid a paper bag across the counter with my order. On the house today, she said with a warm smile, and there's some day-old pastries in there too. We have to throw them out anyway, so... I started to protest, but she shook her head. You've been coming here every day looking at the job boards on your laptop. I recognized the struggle. Was there myself last year. Take the coffee and muffins seriously. As I walked home with my unexpected gifts, I was struck by the stark contrast. Strangers and casual acquaintances were showing me more compassion and practical support than the people who supposedly loved me most. Arthur offered shelter without conditions. Rachel reached out with a potential job lead unprompted. Even Zoe, who knew me only as a regular customer, found a small way to ease my burden. This realization forced me to reevaluate what family truly meant. Was it defined by blood and legal ties, or by actions that demonstrated genuine care? The people who had shown up for me in my moment of need weren't related to me, had no obligation to help, yet offered what they could freely and without judgment. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, processing everything that had happened. The lottery win had given me financial freedom, but these experiences had given me something equally valuable: clarity about my relationships. I broke down crying again, but this time it was different. There was pain in acknowledging the conditional nature of my family's love, but also relief in finally seeing the truth without self-deception. There was grief for the supportive family I'd never had, but gratitude for the genuine connections I'd found elsewhere. As darkness fell over the city, I made my decision. The money would change many things in my life, but it wouldn't change this fundamental truth. Relationships worthy of investment were those based on authentic caring, not obligation or advantage. Going forward, I would build my life around people who showed up when it mattered, regardless of whether we shared DNA. With this clarity came a plan for how to proceed with my lottery winnings and, more importantly, with my relationships. It was time to make my move. The next few weeks were transformative. With my decision made, I set to work securing my future and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with my family. My first priority was ensuring my financial security and independence. I met with a team of financial advisors, lawyers, and accountants to create a comprehensive plan for my newfound wealth. We established a diverse investment portfolio, set up trusts, and created a budget that would allow me to live comfortably without depleting my principal. I was determined not to become a statistic, another lottery winner who ends up broke within a few years. With my advisor's guidance, I purchased a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from downtown Portland. It was nothing like my father and Patty's ostentatious house, no columns or circular driveway, but it had character with a reading nook by the living room window and a kitchen that opened to a small garden. Most importantly, it was mine, paid for in cash, a sanctuary that could never be taken away. I dedicated a portion of my winnings to causes that mattered to me. Organizations supporting foster youth aging out of the system, scholarships for first-generation college students, and a fund at the local community college to help students with emergency expenses. These donations were made anonymously. I wanted no recognition, only the knowledge that I was helping people who, like me, had to fight harder for opportunities. After careful consideration, I also decided to start my own business, a small marketing consultancy specializing in helping local businesses and nonprofits. This wouldn't be about making more money, it would be about creating meaningful work and using my skills to support the community. Through all these changes, I maintained my cover story. As far as my family knew, I was still struggling financially and had somehow managed to make rent through temp work. I stopped asking them for help after the initial test, which they probably found relieving. Finally, 3 months after my lottery win, I was ready for the next phase of my plan. I texted my entire family, inviting them to a dinner celebration for my new job. I said I wanted to thank them for their support during my difficult time. The irony wasn't lost on me. I reserved a private room at one of Portland's finest restaurants, the kind of place my family would approve of, but that I could never have afforded before. When they arrived, my mother and Walter, Dad, and Patty, Kyle, and even step-siblings Jason and Tiffany, their expressions ranged from mild surprise to poorly concealed shock at the venue choice. "Wow, sis," Kyle said as we were seated at the elegantly set table. "This place is a bit extravagant for someone who was nearly homeless a few months ago, isn't it?" "I wanted to celebrate properly," I replied with a smile, "and thank everyone for being there for me during my hardship." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we're always here for you, Ava. You know that." "Do I?" I asked softly, maintaining my smile. Patty quickly jumped in. "So tell us about this new job that allows for dinners at Portland's most expensive restaurant." I took a sip of water, letting the moment stretch. "Actually, there is no new job." Confusion rippled around the table. My mother frowned. "But you said—" I said I had something to celebrate, and I wanted to thank you all for your support during my time of need. I set down my glass carefully. The truth is, none of you supported me. Not really. And I wanted to have this conversation once with everyone present, so there's no confusion about what happened. The atmosphere in the room instantly tensed. Dad began to protest, but I held up my hand. "Please let me finish. 3 months ago, something extraordinary happened to me. I won the lottery. $16 million. The stunned silence was broken by Kyle's burst of laughter. "Yeah, right. Good one, Ava." I removed a folder from my purse and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of the lottery confirmation and bank statements showing my new accounts and investments. Kyle grabbed the documents, his face paling as he scanned them. He passed them to our father, whose hands shook slightly as he examined the papers. This is real, Dad finally asked. Very real, I confirmed. I've already received the lump sum payment after taxes, about $6 million. $6 million, my mother gasped. And you didn't tell us? No, I didn't, I said calmly. Instead, I decided to conduct a little experiment. I asked each of you for help I didn't actually need, to see who would support me if I truly were in trouble. The realization of what I'd done dawned on their faces one by one. Kyle was the first to attempt damage control. Ava, come on, he said with a nervous laugh. That wasn't fair. If we'd known you had money. That's exactly the point, I interrupted. You shouldn't need to know I have money to treat me with basic compassion. I turned to each family member in turn, recounting exactly what they'd said and done when I asked for help. Mum's conditional offer of housing in exchange for becoming her assistant. Kyle's insulting loan terms and self-serving advice. Dad and Patty's refusal of immediate help and their conversation about not enabling me that they thought I hadn't overheard. As I spoke, their expressions cycled through shock, embarrassment, and the beginnings of anger. My mother started crying while my father's face reddened progressively. You set us up, Patty accused, her voice cold. You deliberately tricked us to make us look bad. No, I corrected her. I gave you an opportunity to show who you really are, and you did. This isn't fair, my father protested. We were trying to do what was best for you. Sometimes tough love is necessary. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, there wasn't much love involved at all. I took another sip of water to steady myself. What's interesting is that while my own family offered minimal help with maximum conditions, strangers showed me more kindness. My elderly neighbor offered his spare room for almost nothing. A former coworker sent me a job lead without being asked. Even the barista at my local coffee shop gave me free food when she noticed I was struggling. A heavy silence fell over the table. Jason and Tiffany looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Walter patted my mother's hand awkwardly as she dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. So what now? Kyle finally asked, his tone carefully neutral. You gathered us here to humiliate us, and then what? Tell us you're cutting us out of your life. No, I said. I gathered you here for clarity and honesty. I don't want relationships based on what people can get from me. I want authentic connections with people who care about me for who I am, not what I have. I opened another folder and began handing out envelopes. Inside each envelope is information about a trust I've established for each of you. It's not a large amount, $10,000 each, but it comes with conditions. Conditions? My father raised his eyebrows. Like the conditions you criticized us for placing on our help. Different kinds of conditions, I clarified. The money can only be used for education, medical expenses, or starting a business. And to access it, you'll need to demonstrate genuine effort to build a healthier relationship with me, one based on mutual respect and care, not obligation or advantage. Their reactions were telling. My mother clutched her envelope to her chest, looking at me with new interest. Kyle seemed to be calculating whether $10,000 was worth the effort of being nicer to his sister. Dad and Patty exchanged glances that suggested they found the amount insulting. I don't expect any of you to change overnight, I continued. People rarely do, but I'm setting boundaries going forward. I will not be manipulated, guilted, or made to feel less than because I chose a different path than what you prescribed. I will not be an ATM or a solution to your problems. I'm offering a chance to build something new if you want it. The rest of the dinner was strained with conversation, sticking to safe topics like the weather and the quality of the food. As they prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside. You didn't have to do it this way, he said quietly. You could have just told us about the money. Would that have changed anything fundamental between us? I asked. Or would it just have changed how you treat me because of what I could give you? He had no answer for that. After my family left, I remained at the restaurant, processing the emotional weight of the evening. Then I went home to prepare for my next set of meetings, the ones I was actually looking forward to. The next day, I invited Arthur to coffee and presented him with a check covering his medical expenses that he'd mentioned struggling with. Consider it rent for the room you offered me, I said, when he tried to refuse. His eyes filled with tears as he explained that the money would allow him to get the hip replacement he'd been postponing for years due to high deductibles. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You already did, I told him. when you offered help expecting nothing in return. I met Rachel for lunch and offered to invest in the small graphic design business she'd always dreamed of starting. You reached out when I was down without expecting anything back, I explained. That's the kind of person I want to support. Her stunned expression turned to joy as she pulled out her phone and showed me sketches and business plans she'd been developing for years, but never had the capital to pursue. Finally, I visited Maggie at her apartment, handing her an envelope containing a check that would pay off her student loans entirely. When she saw the amount, she actually dropped it. "Ava, I can't accept this," she protested. "It's too much." "It's not," I insisted. "You've been there for me through everything. You're the sister I wish I'd had by blood. Please let me do this for you." After much persuasion, she accepted, and we spent the evening planning her now debt-free wedding. Over the following months, I settled into my new life. I started therapy to process my complex family relationships and learn to set healthier boundaries. My business began to take shape, focusing on helping small nonprofits amplify their impact through better marketing. I volunteered regularly at a mentorship program for young adults aging out of foster care, offering the guidance I wished I'd had at their age. My family's responses to my boundaries varied. Mum called constantly, at first alternating between guilt trips and enthusiastic plans for how we could spend time together, usually involving me paying for things. I maintained firm but kind limitations on our interactions, insisting on quality time without financial expectations. Gradually, she began to adjust, though our relationship remained a work in progress. Kyle kept his distance, initially clearly uncertain how to relate to me without the dynamics of superiority he'd relied on. When he eventually reached out, it was with awkward attempts at normal sibling interaction that sometimes felt genuine and sometimes felt calculated. Dad and Patty remained the most distant, their pride apparently wounded by both my test and the relatively modest trust I'd established. Occasionally, Dad would call with stilted conversation, never directly addressing what had happened, but making small efforts that suggested he wasn't ready to give up entirely. What surprised me most was how my life filled with authentic connections once I stopped pouring energy into trying to win approval from people who couldn't give it freely. I formed friendships with fellow business owners, volunteers, and neighbors. I created a chosen family of people who demonstrated through consistent actions that they valued me for myself. In my new home, I hosted regular dinners where these people gathered around my table sharing food and conversation without the undercurrents of judgment and competition that had defined my family meals growing up. On those evenings, surrounded by genuine warmth and acceptance, I finally understood what true wealth looked like. It wasn't the millions in my bank account that had transformed my life. It was the clarity to see relationships for what they truly were, the courage to establish boundaries, and the freedom to build connections based on authentic caring rather than obligation. The lottery had given me financial security, yes, but more importantly, it had given me the opportunity to discover who would still be there if I had nothing. As I look back on that strange, painful, beautiful journey, I realize that sometimes the greatest gift isn't the money itself, but the truth it reveals about who deserves a place in your life. And that kind of clarity, it's worth more than any jackpot. What would you do if you suddenly came into a large sum of money? Would you tell everyone right away, or would you wait to see how people treat you? When they don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe to hear more real-life experiences, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded that true worth isn't measured in dollars. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the family we choose matters more than the family we're born into.